Our August webinar series, we kick this month off with talking about just introducing and expanding on technologies within your professional services organization. Throughout the year, we've been sort of building on topics. What is a PSA, professional services automation tool? Why do I need one? How can I pick one? How can I implement one? What are the things that I need to look for as a company? And last month we focused more on integrations. How can I get my systems to talk to other systems to see some efficiencies? And now we're at the point where what else can I do? Right? I have systems, I've got integrations, what else can I do? And that's what today's topic is going to introduce. And then over the next 2 weeks, you'll see that we do have some upcoming webinars that are specific to our technologies that we do support. So next week we'll be talking about the scripting available in OpenAir, so the feature functionality it now supports, and some pretty common scripts that we're working with customers that we see customers wanting to add functionality into the tool. And then in 2 weeks we'll be talking about third-party integrations with the Financial Force products. So Financial Force sitting on the Salesforce platform really opens up a lot to buying or downloading a lot of the App Exchange type modules potentially to work and interact with the tool, as well as all the different ways and options that you can consider expanding on the Financial Force since it's on that force.com platform. From a user group perspective, we still have OpenAir user groups, and our next one will be in Washington, D.C. It'll be hosted by my old company, Software AG, on August 19th from 11 to 2. So if you're in the area, we'd love to have you join us. So let's review why we're talking about PSAs and technology to begin with. So the PSA tools, or professional services automation tools, those are the things that you want to implement in your company because as your company grows, managing things on spreadsheets is more and more cumbersome, more and more time consuming, more and more error prone. And a PSA tool addresses your scalability. It supports your company growth. It supports you as a business evolving over time, maybe changing practices, policies, and so forth. Your business model is something that's going to continue to change also over time as industry trends come up or different rules and regulations for how revenue can be reported. Then that may back into how you manage projects. So the business model is something that you always have to consider when you're working with a PSA tool, as well as making sure that the people who are most likely populating the tool, which are all of your employees, have easy ways to complete their daily tasks. Is the tool a benefit to them, or is it really a data tracker for executive management, and there's still a lot of work behind the scenes? All items that a PSA tool addresses and something that factors into your decision making when you're trying to pick one. The goal would be to provide transparency to various organizational metrics that you have to compute in spreadsheets when you don't have that tool, and of course the spreadsheet master or masters, as the case may be, are really the people that know what's going on behind the scenes, and everything's coded into Excel formulas along the way. But PSAs also have a side benefit of introducing standards. Everyone should be using the same kind of template to manage projects and the same time entry methodologies and compliance. So there's benefits not only to helping you grow the business and support the business, there's also ways to introduce items that can help you grow the business, to help you be scalable, and standardizing processes and methodologies is certainly one of those. Now the why, right? So what is a PSA, and then the why do I need a PSA? It gives you that tool to collect everything centrally instead of having a million spreadsheets or things being emailed around or using some kind of social media tool to pass information around the company. It really gives you that central go-to place within the organization, and ideally you have dashboards and stuff that communicate information very clearly at a glance. The way to track information in the tool from an automation perspective or a data entry perspective with reminders and communications definitely helps remind people that they have actions to do and that they have to take those actions. And of course, once you have all that data in a system, how can that data also translate to other systems so that you don't have that human interface rekeying data in, which of course introduces data accuracy, potential data accuracy problems. So the what is a PSA to support your business, help it grow, give you ways to continue to grow your business. The why being, that it gives you that ability to pull the information that you need to. And then the next question is when. When do I need a PSA? And everyone's familiar with the famous spreadsheet management of organizations, right? And they all start out with one person being responsible for that PSA, or that, well, I guess you could say the Excel PSA version. How's that? So it all starts off with one person being responsible, and then quickly it becomes two people that have to manage it, maybe three. Oh, wait, now we need four. And now we have multiple tabs, and people are contributing to various tabs in this massive spreadsheet that now has to be stored on Google Docs or something in order for it to be shared with password protection and all kinds of stuff. So when you see the organization starting to have a multi-tab, huge spreadsheet, that's when the hands go up saying, can we look at a system to automate some of this stuff, because the spreadsheets really start bogging down the real-timeness of the data, potentially the accuracy of the data. And it requires a lot of manpower to maintain it versus a PSA where you're putting the data in directly and everything should be available to be configured and displayed as you need to, or reports pulled as you need to along the way. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? The PSA tool is the first step in that technology improvement. To get that tool in place, get it up and running, get your processes accommodating that, to have the tool support your processes, to get those reports, to get those metrics. And now you start thinking, okay, so what's next? What's the next level of efficiencies that I can introduce, scalability that I can support and grow the business? And that typically is the integration option, where you have your PSA, but you also have your CRM and you have your ERP. You have all your various systems for your various departments that are all doing their own thing, and they're tracking similar data. So it's the person that's taking the data from one system and typing it into another, and that's where the opportunity for integrations come in, which we talked about last month. So the integrations now give you that data flow, and it also introduces ways to connect the systems and have a common terminology, a consistent data flow from one system to another, so you're not trying to interpret information if you're running reports between two systems, trying to compare them side by side, and something as simple as a dash versus an underscore messes up your ability to sort of map information between the two systems. By the integration, you get more data consistency, naming conventions become important, and your process gate controls, what constitutes moving from system A to system B, who's responsible for that, how do we make sure that the data is owned by the right system at the right time. So that's the second layer of technology that gets introduced into the organization. And then the third layer, I would argue, is really looking to see, well, what else? What else can I do? And it's not necessarily getting more systems. It certainly could be. But you have a PSA, you integrate the PSA, and now you want to expand the PSA to do more of what you need it to do. Not every PSA is a silver bullet to do everything that you need as an organization. There's always something. It doesn't quite do the way that you want. It doesn't do maybe there's a feature that the vendor themselves implemented in a way that you're working with it, you're trying to twist it, but it's not exactly what you need. So you still have to do some manual work outside of the system, potentially. Or you're wanting it to calculate something, it can't really do that. So again, you're having to do stuff outside the system, relying on email for notifications or chatter or something like that. So not all PSA systems are alike, and not all PSA systems will scratch all of your itches. If you're looking for a basic startup, great, but as your company matures and as your processes change and your needs change, you certainly will need more than what comes out of the box. And that's when you start thinking about, can the solution that I selected, the solution that I'm working with, can that be expanded in some way, potentially through coding options? Like the NetSuite OpenAir product can do JavaScripting, Financial Force, being on the Force.com platform, can do Apex coding for triggers and HTML for Output Builder. So those are all ways to do coding in the tool. But I do, part of what we wanted to cover in this webinar is sort of highlight, but what are the pros and cons of making that decision? Yes, you get what you want. You can make it do whatever you want because you're in complete control of the solution. And those could also, in turn, introduce efficiencies that right now you're not recognizing because you're having to do, verbal communication or some kind of calculation out of the system, or your dashboards aren't available within the PSA tool because it's missing one way to do a report, and that way is critical for the dashboard to be able to be displayed correctly. And the other pro is that you really want to influence behavior, right? Like, think of timesheet compliance. How do I make sure that everyone gets their timesheet in? And not having somebody go around, the town crier every Tuesday morning saying, hey, your timesheet's late, get your timesheet in, okay? But on the flip side, even though there's always all these pros and the control and the requirement meetings, there are cons that you have to weigh and understand the benefit and the investment that you're making when you do those things. And they primarily surround around the code itself. Like, you have to maintain the code. You write the code, you are responsible for the code. And when I say you, I mean you as the person who commissioned whoever it was that wrote it. You are now responsible for the code to make sure that if it falls over, do you know how to fix it? You don't have a help desk, so to speak, unless, of course, you've had a third party do it, to reach out to say, hey, this broke, can you fix it? Okay. The other thing is, with a lot of PSA solutions, they're in the cloud, and so because of that, the vendor themselves is responsible for making sure any enhancements they make to the PSA solution, to the code baseline, does not break the tool. Like, of course, if they do break it, they're on the hook to fix it right away. It's priority one, got to get it corrected. So if they introduce a new function or they introduce a new part of a feature, they are responsible for making sure that there's no downstream ripple effect that's negative in the tool. But they're not responsible for your code. So if your code was relying on something to work in some way, or to have a database field available in some way, or to have access to some kind of module call in coding speak, they're not responsible for making sure that you test your code to say it doesn't break. When your code breaks, you have to fix it. And so you have to pay very much attention to, when a vendor releases new software, reading the fine print in the release notes, especially when it comes to things like APIs, that you're making sure that your code will continue to work when that change happens. And in some cases, you don't get a choice on when you take that change. That change gets pushed out, and you need to be in that same lock timeline step. So there is a timing aspect of it. Some PSA solutions, you have the choice of when to take the new software, some you don't. So you have to factor that into your testing windows and schedules. And the other con, which probably doesn't sound like a con, but I think it is in my view, is when you are buying a PSA solution, you're buying a solution that is the best fit at the time, obviously, for your organization. And the more you add your own customization, the less you are relying on the vendor's core solution. And why is that a con? I would argue if you created a special way to do, to create records in the system, and suddenly the vendor comes out with a solution to also create vendors the vendor comes out with a solution to also create records in the solution in an automated way. Most likely you probably won't dump your code unless it's really been difficult to maintain. You'll probably keep the code, but you're not taking advantage of that feature. And now you're on the hook to keep your code alive while the vendor has something that they're on the hook to. So are you paying attention to those features coming out? Are you paying attention to what you can have now become something that's the vendor's responsibility versus something that you still have in-house that you still have to maintain? And as we all know, as time goes on, the people who originally wrote it tend to fade by the wayside, and then you're not sure how to fix it if something goes wrong. So every time there's a release, I would also argue that if you have something in there that's customized, I would reevaluate to say, do I still need it? And see if there's something that you could slowly phase out of just because you're waiting for the vendor to catch up with your brilliant ideas along the way. So the typical reasons for some kind of expansion or coding, I've grouped them into 5 areas. One area is keeping people informed. And that's really more notification type thing, but of course, we'll talk about the, notifications. Then there's the automation pieces, things like how do I create records automatically, or how do I populate data automatically, which is slightly different than creating records. Here you just want to sort of, you select A and then B, C, and D fill in automatically. How do you make sure that the data that's being put in is accurate? So automating some of the data entry validation that you could be doing in a more reactive way when you do auditing. And of course, policy compliance. That's a big one, to try and say, how do I make sure people are being compliant with the policies within my organization? From a user-informed area and the reminders area, this is typically emails, right? And what do we all get a lot of? Emails. So emails are coming in our inbox all the time. Some are more important than others. And just by the title, a lot of times I'm going through and deleting stuff that I know is something that I subscribe to, but I don't have time to read it, so I know it's a news bulletin or some kind of informational thing that I have sending to me, so I just delete that email. And if it was a reminder that said, hey, your timesheet's late, I don't get those very often, thankfully, because I'm compliant with timesheets. So I would pay attention to that when it came in, and I would act on that. So when you're doing these emails, you want to make sure that the email that's coming out is focused on what kind of action is required by the individual or what dependency that notification has if the individual does not follow through with the action. So if it's a notification to say, hey, we've closed this project or this contract to XYZ person knows when that email comes in, I am responsible for going up and setting up the billing rules on that project, or I'm responsible for going up and setting up the resource requests on that project. So that's an action. That's the notification that's helpful in the organization. And if you don't have that automated, of course, you can build that in. But also limit the emails. Too often we'll schedule lots of reports to come to us every Monday or Tuesday. We don't have time to read them, so now it's just filling our inbox in. And really you want something that's more actionable along the way, because you can always proactively go into the PSA solution to pull the data as you need to. And then customize the content to the end user if it's a possibility, especially if it's like, hey, your timesheet's late. Everyone knows that's a generic email. But if you could have some kind of fancy notification that says, your timesheet's 3 days late and you were late last week as well, and I don't know if that's even possible, but that's the kind of stuff that prompts people to know this is a special email just to me. It's not a broadcast, and I need to take action on it. Okay. As we all know, if it's an email or piece of information is not effective, it goes in the bit bucket. It gets routed, and most of us know how to do the inbox rules to route emails automatically to the delete bucket, which of course will then prevent the usefulness of this type of enhanced technology. Now, automating data entry can certainly be a time saver, right? I don't have to click, create a customer and then create a project and then create a bunch of milestones and then create a resource request. I kind of just click one button and have it create everything automatically, provided I give you some basic information. Okay. But don't really forget, the more you automate the data entry, the more people start losing understanding of, potentially, not everyone, but potentially understanding of the relationship of the data that's getting put in. I clicked a button and everything gets created automatically. So when I go to run a report, I'm just expecting it to be there. If it's not there, do I know where to look and find out what went wrong? Right? Do I know where to look to find out where my resource requests were missing, or where are the resource requests supposed to be in the tool? I would also say that when you have this type of automation in there, I would schedule some kind of like a periodic audit to make sure that everything's being updated correctly, or at least you're getting some kind of logs on a regular basis that show you whether there were failures or not, just basic software management type help desk type things, so that you make sure that the data entry tool, script, code, whatever you wrote is not throwing any kind of errors, and you're not being told about it along the way. And then as with anything, businesses will change over time. So something that is automated today may not be possible tomorrow because you acquired another company and they're completely different on how they set projects up. So therefore, your project automation code needs to be changed or scrapped or something. Okay. So there is automation, but then there's also that you're responsible for maintaining it and updating it as time goes on. Now, the automated field population, I always like this idea because it gives you that high data of accuracy, confidence, right? Like, you don't have to make sure that you're, fixing data that was put in wrong. The data is accurate because you're putting dependencies on information as you're entering it into the system as part of the code setup, right? But the things to consider here are there are occasions, probably, ideally, there's very few of these, but there are occasions where you have exceptions and you have to change the way the information is being entered. So if you automate it so much that you can't handle exceptions, now you have a different problem. Now you're having to do exception reporting outside of your PSA tool. So the thing that you just did to automate everything and make it more efficient, expanding that technology, created more work outside of the tool for these exception projects. So that's just something to keep in mind there. And of course, as with the automated data entry, you want to make sure that you have a way to audit how that data is being auto-populated, make sure there's no failures going on, and then change management controls as you add new values, categories, practices, departments, things like that. Does the code need to change to accommodate those in the auto-population scheme of what you built? So there's certainly maintenance and reviews of those on a regular basis necessary. Now, validating data entry. This is an area where people are putting the data in and they hit save, and in some systems, simple things like this field is required. You get that error message, right? You have to fill something in here, and it could also be that these two fields do not map together. You can't put Jody in HR because she's supposed to be in PS, and therefore, the data entry that you put in to assign her to this task does not work right. So from the validation of data entry, there's also the flip side of, always think in the negative, right? And when you're coming up with, this would be great if we can have something that validates our data nicely. Think in terms of the negative of, well, what happens if people sort of work the system? How do they learn what is the minimum needed and they work around it? Or they're not really paying attention to the way they're putting data in because they have a reliance on, oh, the system will just catch that, right? You want to make sure people know why they're typing data in and make sure that data is quality and not rely so much on the system to validate it to catch any errors, because as businesses change, maybe the validation gets out of date as well. And then we have the exceptions again. Sometimes there are exceptions, and then how do you accommodate that? How do you put that into the logic to allow those exceptions to happen, but not have the exceptions be the rule going forward? And if there are no exceptions, then it's more of a how do you help that person understand how best to work around, which we don't like that word, I know, but how to work around the controls that are in the system and still get to the information entry that they're looking to put in. Okay. Now, the other thing is, when you want to make sure that data is put in the system or the data is accurate, there's the common example I gave, which is you must fill out this field, right? And the worst thing you want is, the reason you have that in there is you really want that field to be filled in with valid data. Unfortunately, in some cases, you can't validate the content of the data, especially when it's text. So pretend like you're on your, filling out like an expense report, and you come up with this field, and an error comes up saying description is required, right? So if you're filling out an expense report or a receipt, your description could be, oh yeah, this was a business meal, or I took so-and-so out to dinner, or I had to rent the car because the Uber didn't work on my phone, whatever. That could be too long of a description, but description required sort of implies that because of the form you're on. But the system doesn't care what you type in, so you can just type in okay, and that's good enough, or period, or dash, or asterisk, and that's enough because there's something in the field, and that's as far as it goes. So think in terms of like, what will people do to sort of get past the error, and how can you put audits in place to still catch those kind of errors, because even validating data entry does not mean 100% the data will always be the best data ever. And finally, how to enforce policy compliance. So this is one of my favorite ones, where, how do you make sure that the data that's being captured by the PSA is in a timely manner, it's accurate, and it's available for reporting and taking action on, like billing and revenue and things like that. So here, I would say there's policy compliance, and then the human factor level has to be considered as you're coming up with ways to sort of enforce policy. The word enforce automatically makes me think of, okay, so if I have to force someone to do X, they will figure out a way to do X prime, or some slight variation that I wasn't expecting. So the more you automate stuff, the less thinking the individual is going to do, and that could be a detriment for things like auto-populating timesheets with, okay, well, here's your schedule for the week. Just let us know if this is right, right? That creates, sort of, a sense of laziness almost, because you're like, well, that's what they expected. That's good enough. I'll hit go, right? So avoid things that you want things to be easier for the individual to do their daily tasks, but you don't want to make them so easy that they start falling back on accuracy, and emphasize the fact that you need accuracy in the system. You're just trying to help them make it a simpler method and remind them of things that they may have forgotten. That's the intent, right? But also consider what could go wrong, right? Things like making sure that people only put the number of hours that are left on their budget on a task. Like, I'm assigned to a task, I have 8 hours to do that task, I worked 10, and I get an error because I'm going over my budget, okay? So maybe their policy is you have to go and talk to the project manager to increase the planned hours, so that there's a known entity of overage going on. But if you don't have the time to talk to PM, you don't know the PM's number, you're doing it on a weekend, no one's going to get back to you. Maybe I just say, okay, well, I'll just put 8 in there, I'll put 2 somewhere else, right? Now you're putting bad data in the system. And it's hard to catch that, right? Because it's valid data, but it's bad data. So think about things that people could possibly do to be able to be compliant, because they certainly want to be compliant. But the compliance may be at a sacrifice for accuracy. So review that in context of human behavior, or at least put a message out there to explain why things are being done in a certain way and how the audits will help understand whether that data is at least as accurate as possible. So basically, going through these examples, you can see the technology in a professional services organization almost starts with a PSA, expands to integration, and then you look at what else can the PSA do, right? And the emphasis should be on how can I minimize my data entry, how can I increase my data accuracy, and how can I make sure that I'm keeping everyone in the loop with that centralized system, because that's the whole intent of the PSA, is to help your company with scalability, information, and data tracking, right? But automation doesn't mean that you can't replace people. So you still have to consider people and what people are being asked to do and meet and support in the organization. And understand that even the custom logic that you put in today may be obsolete next year. So make sure you have ways to maintain that data, and you go through a robust series of testing along the way. So with that, I'm going to open up the phone line, so we'll stop the recording.